To understand the Keshe Foundation's GANs and MAGRAV physics framework, we must map its internal structural logic. At the core of this system is a distinct paradox. Its definitions for plasma and solid matter completely contradict standard thermodynamic models. In standard physics, a phase change is a thermal event. You heat a solid, the atoms excite, and it becomes a liquid or plasma. But in the Keshe model, seen on the right, the transition from plasma to matter is dictated purely by spatial geometry, the physical distance between microscopic elements. Miran Keshe originally explained this using an anthropomorphic analogy of children standing in a schoolyard with their arms outstretched. We can reconstruct that thought experiment into a strict kinematic lattice model. Establishing this precise geometric baseline is the only way to test the structural logic behind his claims regarding zero-resistance superconductivity. These same atomic-scale geometric rules are what supposedly scale up to operate his macroscopic energy generators. To understand this framework, we have to abandon thermal physics entirely and look at a universe governed strictly by the manipulation of empty space. We start by defining the foundational unit of the entire system, the individual atomic node. Keshe's arm's length analogy becomes topology. A single core establishes a spherical domain. The empty gap to its boundary is a rotating plasma zone. A second node locks where boundaries touch but don't overlap. 10 to the 9th of these aligned units form a 1-meter line. This single unbroken linear alignment of geometrically spaced units is defined as a nano-layer. The defining structural property of this layer is the uniform 10 to the -9 meter physical gap maintained between the actual core nodes. Within this framework, the theoretical energy of the system is preserved exclusively within these rigidly maintained spatial gaps. At this stage, because their physical boundaries only touch and never intersect, the individual units retain total freedom of rotation and lateral movement. Here, the term nano-layer refers to the geometric alignment itself, rather than a specific physical substance. We can expand this spatial architecture by stacking these one-dimensional layers vertically and along the z-axis, creating a perfect three-dimensional geometric grid. Keshe compares this structure to a construction toy called knack, relying on rigid, fixed nodes held together by perfectly equal spatial connectors. The defining feature of this 3D lattice is absolute uniformity. The physical gaps between the nodes are mathematically identical in every direction. When stacked this way, those uniform gaps align to create continuous, unimpeded geometric corridors running clear through the entire matrix. Watch what happens when a foreign energy body attempts to traverse this highly ordered structure. Because of the precise spacing, the moving body passes straight down the open channels. It never intersects the radius boundaries of the resident nodes. The absence of geometric intersection means there is no physical resistance applied to the traveling body. This frictionless, unimpeded traversal through uniform spatial gaps is the exact structural definition of superconductivity within the Keshe model. But what happens if that stable lattice is subjected to external spatial compression? Keshe returns to his schoolyard analogy to explain this, asking us to imagine those individuals dropping their outstretched arms and forcing themselves shoulder to shoulder. Mapping this analogy to our matrix, we see the active reduction of those equidistant gaps. The nodes collapse inward, their outer boundaries aggressively overlapping. This completely chokes off the corridors. A foreign particle hits the overlapping fields, immediately halting its progress. This sudden, localized loss of freedom of movement forces a distinct phase shift in the material. This dense, boundary-overlapping state serves as the ontological definition of matter in the Keshe framework. Notice that this drastic phase transition occurred entirely through geometric pressure. We did not introduce or remove a single joule of thermal energy. Solid matter is simply a plasma lattice that has been geometrically forced to surrender its internal spatial gaps. This brings us to a critical mechanical constraint. Compressing these spatial gaps does not add any external energy to the system. Using another analogy, Keshe likens this to a densely packed concert crowd. The people haven't eaten more food to generate more power. Instead, the system relies entirely on endogenous energy, the inherent kinetic potential that perpetually exists inside every individual node. When the nodes are compressed shoulder to shoulder, that endogenous energy has nowhere to dissipate. Because the fields overlap, any kinetic force applied to a single node instantly dictates the physical position of all adjacent nodes. The independent freedom of movement that characterized the plasma state has been entirely absorbed by the collective totality of the matrix. It operates like a rigid tug-of-war rope. Pulling on one specific piece translates force across the entire line. In the matter state, energy transfer is instantaneous and highly concentrated because the endogenous fields are physically entangled. We can now take this atomic lattice model and apply it directly to Keshe's intended macro-engineering application, the space reactor. According to the blueprints, these theoretical reactors operate entirely by artificially manipulating that 10 to the minus 9 meter spatial gap between the GANS layers. By forcing the GANS plasmas into extreme geometric compression, the reactor causes an intense concentration of their endogenous field energy. This forced spatial compression triggers a critical secondary effect, rapid rotational acceleration. Keshe refers to this as the ballerina principle. Just as an ice skater spins faster when she pulls her arms inward, compressing the rotating field of the node conserves angular momentum and drastically increases its rotation speed. Pulling the magnetic gravitational fields inward forces the entire matrix to spin faster, theoretically generating macroscopic lift. That rapid release of concentrated rotational energy is the exact mechanism claimed to generate external power for the reactor. A kinematic reconstruction of Keshe's analogies exposes a theoretical universe governed entirely by the geometric manipulation of empty space.